and catch the leaves on top of this tree?
You can see green.
Alright, we're rolling.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. Good evening, I suppose. I'm Neil Peterson. Around town somehow I'm known as the tree guy. I'm a forest ecologist with the Harvard Forest. Today I'm a member of the Maynard Tree Corps. And we'll get going in a few minutes. We'll wait a minute or two for people to log on. Today we're out here in the Summerhill green space just north of 117, so you can hear some trucks and cars, traffic just south of us. And it's a lovely day. The pandemic and where society is right now is a little less than lovely. A lot less than lovely. It's a tough time, but right now in the forest, not so bad. It's a little dry. We'll talk about that too. But we're out in, I think it's one of my favorite forests here in Maynard that I've visited so far. It's just a wonderful forest. Chipmunks are chirping, birds are chirping.
Mosquitoes are buzzing.
Mosquitoes?
Yep.
And this is really a nice forest. I really encourage you to come visit this forest. It's quite dense. Our last series of hikes were along the river, and I think because of the slope and because of all the beaver activity along the Aspet River Trail up on the northeast side of town where we were, that forest was a lot more open. And even though everything's greened up since the last time we've done this, it's still a relatively open forest compared to here. This is just really, when I came back here after the leaves came out this year, after spending so much time on the Aspet River Trail, I felt not claustrophobic, but almost. It just was. It's a beautifully dense forest right now. So I'll get going. Welcome. I hope everyone is mentally, physically, as well as can be given our circumstances, doing what you can to improve the lives of yourself and others. I have my mask today, and when I'm hiking, I'll pull it up. When I'm on camera, I will pull it down, so if people are hard of hearing, then they need to read my lips, they can read my lips a little bit better. But I think wearing masks, even though it's very safe out in the forest and transmission is really low, I still think wearing masks from a biological perspective is really important. So you'll see me wearing it quite often. I just heard too many stories about pandemics in the past. It's in my discipline, and you hear these stories. And I spent 5 years at a regional institution in a comprehensive biology department, so I learned a lot about genetics and diseases and evolution. And so pandemics have always been there in the back of my mind, and here we are today. It's not over. But today we're in the forest. Today we're at the Summerhill Preserve out here just north of 117 in Maynard. It really is a gem in the Harvard Forest, and what we're going to do today is we're going to introduce you to some new species. We'll do some quick ways of identifying trees like last time. It's more of a gestalt. I don't use very many specifics, so sometimes it's not fully helpful. Someday we'll be able to gather on the trail and I can show you more closely what I mean. But this is where we are, and this is what we do. So we might not get very far because I'm going to talk a lot about land use of this site, why this is really a great example of resiliency of nature. And we're going to talk about something you'll see up ahead. If Brent films down further, you can see it looks a little brighter down there. That's probably where we'll end, maybe just 150 feet from here. But I wanted to start on this site because in this location of our site, we came off the Summerhill entrance to get to this point. And I'm going to show you this tree. We might show it to you a few times. We saw it back on the other site. This is mockernut hickory, Caria tomentosa. Now that the leaves are out, and I'm going to take a leaf from a smaller tree. Deepest apologies. And you can see here, maybe you can't, but this is the rachis that holds the leaflets of this tree. And I don't know if you'll be able to pick this up on the camera. It might be hard, but if you come out here and just feel this, it's very hairy. You can feel all the bristles of hair along the rachis. And so tomentosa means hairy. So it's mockernut hickory, but you could also think of it as hairy hickory. Not as a man's name, but as hairy as my COVID hair. And it has really dark bark, or at least some lichen and algae on it that gives it a dark appearance. So I will be showing you some exceptions to this. And if you could just pan up that tree, you can see the large leaves and leaflets that are grown with this tree. And it gives our forest, our northern forest, a real tropical feeling to me. Not as tropical as magnolias, but tropical in a sense. And I want to start here. We're on the south-facing slope of Summerhill. And honestly, this hill, this slope, looks like forests in Virginia, in the Blue Ridge Mountains. There's not a lot of difference between the forest here and in the Blue Ridge Mountains. So this is a very southern forest. It's a south-facing slope. It gets long, hot exposure to the sun during the day. These soils are a little drier because of that, because the heat is doing, and the sun is doing a lot of evapotranspiration. And so what you see on this site, what we will see, but it's best exemplified by this mockernut hickory, is a southern forest. There's a lot of oak and hickory in here that we'll see. And so it's the oak hickory forest that's more common well south of us, like from Pennsylvania south. And mockernut hickory in particular is one of the less common southern hickories that we have here. We're living up on the northeast corner of its natural distribution. It goes further north, no doubt, but not a lot farther. And so when I first started seeing mockernut hickory on these southern slopes, there's one on the Water Tower Hill off of 27 in Acton. We saw it along the river in Aspet River Trail. Mockernut hickory is southern, but it also grows on certain soil types with high, high nutrients like calcium, magnesium, these micronutrients that are important for life, but are less common in our landscape. These soils are not basic, but they're less acidic than a lot of our normal soils. So mockernut hickory is an example of the soil type here, but it's also an example of the forest type here, and it's really a good example of where we are in New England. The center part of New England, about where we are and cutting through central Massachusetts, is this big transitional zone where the southern forest, exemplified here by mockernut hickory, intermingles with species from the northern forest. So not here, but we'll see next time on the other side of the slope, but even down lower, we see more northern species like sugar maple and, well, some more. You'll see them soon. They're really great. Like birches, like paper birch and yellow birch. And at this site in Maynard, this really exemplifies this north versus south meeting of the forest type that is emblematic of central New England. And so we have it right here in Maynard, and right now we're in a southern forest. You could almost think you're in Virginia. I also wanted to start here because there's another species that we have not talked about yet. We've not seen it. This is the only place I've seen it, but I've not really looked hard for it. This is big tooth aspen. And this bark right here, this nice gray bark, that doesn't help you very much, but it's a light gray. It's lighter than a lot of other grays that you see in tree barks, but maybe American beech has a similar gray color to this one, but this has ridges and furrows, and it has these flat ridges right here. This is really representative of big tooth aspen, and I've been twiddling with this leaf the whole time because this is how I identified it when I first saw this a few years ago. You could see the big teeth on the margins of this leaf. It also has a very flat petiole, so this stem that attaches the leaf to the branch is called a petiole, and this is very flat. You can see how it flips when I roll it from between my fingers. It flips back and forth. And this action that you're seeing, this almost spastic flipping that you see, is another good way of identifying aspens. There's another species called quaking aspen that literally really quakes. But right now there's a wind going through these tall trees. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them right here. And you can see that they're flipping back and forth more than, maybe you can't, but you'll have to trust me. They're flipping back and forth with the wind more than the other species. And so this is big tooth aspen. It's a new species. We had 27 on the Assabet River Trail. Since then I've found 3 more: American chestnut, basswood, and I'm forgetting the other one right now. But we've added another one. So now we've got 31 tree species here in Maynard. So let's keep going. As you see in this forest, it's a very dense forest right now. There are not many large trees in this forest. This forest is recovering from various types of land use. I would imagine over the last 2 centuries. These trees might all be the same age. I don't think that's always true. Obviously not for these little ones, but they might be some of the same age. But there aren't many large trees here. This forest is still in recovery from whatever happened in the past. And I pause here because I don't know why I didn't see this before. I've only been coming here 4 years now. It's a sugar maple right here on our trail. And sugar maple is another species that needs these more basic, rich nutrient soils like mockernut hickory. So it's another indicator that the underlying geology and the nutrients are favorable for those 2 species. So I'm going to stop with these 2 trees in a second, and I'm going to set my timer because I forgot to start it. There we go. And this is a new species right here. I said this was an oak hickory forest. This right here is pignut hickory. It has the ridges and furrows that we've seen in a lot of different species, but this one has sharper furrows, sharper and deeper furrows, V-shaped furrows, and sharper ridges, unlike the big tooth aspen. If you want to catch this light right here, Brent, that can really show it nicely. And mockernut and pignut are really difficult to tell from leaflets and from the leaves. But if you get your hands on a hickory seedling and you feel the rachis, pignut has no hairs. It's free of hairs, and so Caria glabra. Glabra means smooth, right? Glabra, I should brush up on my Latin. Anyway, there's no hairs on pignut hickory, and there's a seedling here that's very hairy. So this is a hickory seedling right there that's very hairy. So that's mockernut hickory. But this is its cousin. This is a very large pignut hickory. They are much faster growing than mockernut hickory. Mockernut hickory is very slow growing. And this is the tree that really, after I saw mockernut hickory on this site, this particular tree is the one that really stopped me in my tracks here on Summer Hill. This is actually a white oak, but it's a very slow growing white oak. It's got extremely smooth bark right here. We talked about it last time. It's got some furrows and ridges here, but it's the smooth white bark suggests that it's a very slow growing individual. And if Brent can pan up the stem of this tree, you'll notice that it kind of wiggles back and forth. It's not a straight stem. It looks like it's moving from right to left to right to left. And I take this as a sign that maybe it could be a slower growing tree. The smooth bark, the wiggling of the stem, the sinuosity of the stem suggests that it could be fighting its neighbor, like this pignut hickory, but maybe there were other trees here, trying to get into the canopy. And if you pan up the white oak just one more time, you notice that all the branches are pointing south, downhill. That tells you that there was a forest here around this tree, at least on the north side and a little bit on the east side. And so this tree, for it to survive, it grew up and out towards the south, but it only had room to put out successful branches to the south. And so this tells you something about the history of this forest, that there was something here that forced it to grow that way. Again, it could be this hickory. There might have been some other trees here, but now if Brent pans upslope, you'll see a twin-stemmed white oak right 15 feet from us. Yep, that's it. So that's a two-stemmed white oak. It might be a tree that came up from a cut stump. Oaks are able to sprout when they're cut, and they'll come up along the outside of the stump, and a bunch of individuals will arise, but maybe only 2 or 3 will survive over a century or more. And then it's hard to say, but if you come a little bit this way and then pan up slope again, there's a black oak behind that. It's the large black tree out behind that. And it has multiple stems, saying that, again, that maybe this was cut. There's another thing to think about here. These trees with this twisty white oak are kind of in a straight line. And so when you see this in the forest, it kind of tells you that maybe this was an old fence line of some kind. Maybe this divided a property long time ago. Or maybe this divided a pasture, and maybe things were separated by barbed wire, so maybe it wasn't too long ago. So we don't see any barbed wire. There's no stone wall here, but maybe one part of this forest was a woodlot. Maybe the other part of today's forest was actually an open pasture, and that's something we'll talk about on later hikes. But when you see trees growing like that with that architecture, growing in a straight line with branches only on one side of the tree, or like that white oak, then you think this is a boundary of some sort of land use from well in the past. But I want to take you up on some more recent disturbance in this forest. So we're going to walk quietly for a little bit. Pause here for a quick second. Mosquitoes are got my ankles. It feels good. It's nice to be outside again. And in this little clump, if Brent just scans around again, you see some really large oaks. Most of these are black oak. You could tell black oak from red oak because the bark is usually blacker. But on this individual tree, you see these short blocks of ridges in the bark. So here are the furrows, here are the ridges, and these are like little blocks of bark. That's very characteristic of black oak. And in this pan, there's a clump of large trees, which again tells me maybe some trees were left here if this was a pasture as shade for the animals that were working the landscape, making a living. But also within this stand, there's lots of small trees like this red maple. But then there's a hickory here as well. Yeah, that's a mockernut hickory. It's got a hairy petiole. But you have a nice little clump of small trees here, which says that maybe there was a gap here 15, 20 years ago that these small trees are now filling in. So this might have been a wide open gap, but the small trees got established, the maple, the hickory, and have now filled this gap. And so I don't know when, but I can tell you for sure this used to be open sky instead of the closed canopy that we have right now overhead. And there's a beautiful hickory making it look like we're in the tropics almost. So in a sense now, we're going to go back in time. We started with the bigger trees down there, especially that white oak with the smooth bark, which I think is a little older. We have these clumps of larger black oaks. Black oak are very fast growing, so they might only be 80 to 100 years old. And then we have this clump of smaller trees right here, which I'm telling you is a gap now that has been filled in by trees. Let's roll this film of ecology just one more slide back. One more frame back. To this. This is what we call a tip-up mound. This was formed in March 2018 with that snow and ice storm that we had here in Maynard. You can see the roots that used to go straight down into the ground of this. This is a black oak, and you can see the hole that it created. This is very new, especially in terms of ecology. It's only 2 years old. Poison ivy is covering the tip-up mound, which is lovely. It'll turn a beautiful red in the fall. And it's down here. So poison ivy is a disturbance species. That means when the canopy gets opened up, then other species come in really quick to fill the gap. And poison ivy is one of those species. But this is also the beginning of pit and mound topography. When we go into old forests and we try to figure out without coring trees if it's an old growth forest, we look at pit and mound topography. Not like this, but if we can now take that film and play it forward 200 years or 300 years, this, because of rain and gravity and decay, will start to slump into the ground, and some of it will start filling this pit. But in 200 or 300 years, we'll still be able to see a slight rise in the soil and a pit where the tree used to stand, and the stem will be gone. It'll be all decayed. But if we find those pit and mound topography, it tells us that the landscape was never plowed, right? That it wasn't a farm. Any other point that, as far as we can tell. Now, Europeans have been making large fields for 200-300 years now. I have seen some old fields abandoned by by Europeans now that are starting to form what looks like old growth pit and mound topography. This is how it occurs. This is how it starts. It's a natural process. It's one that I actually like to see. I don't mind. I mean, I don't like it when big trees die, but I know what's happening here. The soil is getting turned up. It's getting enriched. Leaves are falling in here, so if the soils are a little sandy or nutrient poor, leaves are accumulating here. They're decaying. The soil's getting enriched. This organic matter will eventually decay. It's feeding the microbes and all the invertebrates, and it's enriching the soil. And Brent, if you don't mind coming down here. This is the big black oak that fell down in the 2018 storm. It's actually, are you comfortable getting up on this? It's pretty neat. So, okay. So if you point up now, you could see blue sky. It's a wonderful blue day. This canopy in January 2018 was full. It was a full canopy. This big black oak came down, and actually, if you pan over to your right, took down a pignut hickory and another black oak, and you can see the root balls. We call those root balls of the pit and mound topography, and took those down as well. And I've played on this tree for a while. It's really a lot of fun. It's a playground for our kids, really. And it took down a couple big oaks down farther. So now there's a huge gap in the canopy, and you could see it heading south. So one tree led to the tip up of two other trees, which led to the tip up of two other trees, and it opened the canopy. In 2 years only, though, we have tree seedlings that were already established, like this hickory, and it's a mocker nut, it's awfully fuzzy, starting to fill this gap. This red maple is starting to fill this gap. This sugar maple came through the tip up pretty much unscathed. And so in only 10 years, this part of the gap, I bet, will be filled by this red maple. There are invasive species in here that are also going to start filling up the gap, and that's something we haven't talked about much. Non-native species that can take advantage of these open conditions and start to change the ecology of our forests. And when these canopies open up, there are opportunities for various non-native species like honeysuckle and a few other species. You can go just, it's nice and wide. And you can see the vines, the invasive species, are starting to take over this tree. But we have a nice sized red maple here that's actually doing pretty well. Doesn't look like it was too damaged. It'll start growing out. There's no competition above it. It'll start overtopping all these trees, and it'll start growing very rapidly. I use tree rings to understand the past, and what I would do 20 years from now, maybe, is I would core this tree, and I would see that this tree was growing fairly slow, and then suddenly, around 2018, 2019, this tree started accelerating growth. It started growing 50 to 100% faster than it was in the previous decade or so. And then that's one way that I can put together the long history of the forest using tree rings. This tree will bear witness to this tree falling in the forest. A young ecologist 30 years from now can come and study this forest, and they'll be able to document, well, they'll still see a lot of this tree 30 years from now, and they'll see the tip-up mound, but they'll know when it happened by using the tree rings from this individual tree. And so if we look out, now you have a good view of this gap, right? Mm-hmm. This is really a large gap here that formed. what we see here are sugar maples coming in. So this is a nice crop of maples coming off this bent, crushed stem. But these branches have now turned upright and are now shooting to fill up the gap. And so, as tough as it is to see these wonderful big trees flipped over.
Alright, we're back.
You're back.
Sorry.
It's okay. Technology's still not perfect. But as I was saying, even though it's sad to lose these 3, 4, 5 really big, beautiful trees, the recovery has started. The resiliency of this forest has begun from the 2018 storm. So there's a sugar maple over here. There's another sugar maple over there. There's red maple. If you pan a little bit to your right, you'll see a pine tree, a white pine. White pine does not live in shade very well, but that one survived 10, 15, 20 years. And now it has a wide at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 species that we can see right now. I see an elm down there that looks like it's bent over, but it might be able to right itself through a branch. This is going to create new habitat for 5 or 6 new species in the coming years. And so, this is what I want to emphasize, that nature is extremely resilient. These trees came down just a few years ago.
There we go.
Okay.
Alright, we're back.
Alright, we're going to wrap this up. We're starting to get technical difficulties. I just want to emphasize what you're seeing, while it's sad, is very natural ecological processes. Turning over the soil, enriching the soil by incorporating new organic matter into the soil. It'll hold water better. New habitat is being created. These trees on the margin of the gap are going to get more